Hey everyone, Siobhan Nicolau here, taking you through my first book, The Absence of Evil Love's Reclamation of the Soul, chapter by chapter. And today's chapter is chapter 4, The Principles of Lust. We all go through it growing up. And I have to say, I look at things today and I'm just really glad that I grew up in an age of no information about anything from my family, from my mother, my dad, nothing. There was no sex talk. Um, there was no nothing. That was a non-issue issue in our family, and we had no guidance in that way. So leaving home so early kind of put me out in the field, if you will. Even before I left home, and so when I was 13 was when I actually lost my virginity, and then there was only a couple of times I had sex before I was 15, and that was the first relationship that I ever had, the first house I ever had. And the first whole set of responsibility I had been raised to assume. Growing up was pretty much being a really good cook and being good at the things at home, house cleaning and things like that. It wasn't about learning any kind of higher education, being in any kind of higher education or skill. So these were the skill set that I had leaving home. Was being able to cook and clean and garden and things like that. And I still love to do those things today. I'm just not OCD like I used to be about it. Um, so it was actually a good experience. And I look at kids today and I just feel so sorry for them because nothing's organic. There's so much information out there that they have these preconceived notions about what sensuality is supposed to be about, what it's supposed to look like, what they prefer it look like. There was just no appreciation for the innocence of it all. I don't think it's something that, if it's forced upon you, if it's a date rape or something. I hear a lot of girls say, well, I didn't have a good time because it was my first, it was a date rape. And I just thought that was terribly sad. But my first experience wasn't like that. There was an experience I don't write about in the book, but it will and be part of what I write about in other publications in the future. But I was at a party and I was among these people who I didn't think about being connected to any particular type of consciousness. What was really astounding to me was that I didn't feel the difference between the energy of my family and these people. It just felt kind of natural. I guess that's how you'd say it. There was no variation. It's like there was no light in my life growing up. So when I went into this darker version of darkness, I mean, how do you slice it up, right? There is no darker than dark. It's all the same consciousness. It's just different expressions of that consciousness. One of the ways that light and dark, if you want to call it that, grab a hold of people to do its work is through the sexual experience. And knowingly or unknowingly, these things occur. I think mostly it's just unknowingly until the information age. And then people know way too much about things they have no business knowing. It would serve them not to know so they could not get in their way. But we're all here to evolve and create what we need to evolve. So I guess that's perfect too, right? Of course it is. So anyway, I was kind of brought into this collective by having sex with a man. And I enjoyed it. And he looked at me and he said, if I were you, I would leave here and I would never come back. And I looked at him so interestingly and I said, well, why do you say that? And he didn't answer. It was after that party that I ended up sleeping in the tall grass because I had to climb out my window to get to this party. So I ended up, it was just so beautiful out in nature where we lived. You know, on the way home, I just stopped to rest in the grass and kind of gazed at the stars in the sky because they were just so incredibly beautiful. But I didn't realize for decades after that until I was really learning how to heal my own soul and all the dynamics of darkness, how they work, um, to know that this was a pivotal time in my life in the way of energy and how I was affected by it. And I didn't even know it for decades afterward. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm glad that things don't catch up with me for a long time because to me, it's just, I like to consider myself on a need to know basis. It keeps you out of your head. And if you're out of your head, then you're in more of a receptive mode. And that's where the magic of life is if you don't beat everything to death with your brain and divide everything as a result. And when you divide something and you try to figure it out and pick it apart, you tend to be more of the problem than the solution. Well, I never even felt that even now, I never felt like, you know, I could talk to people and they say, well, you know, that was totally sexual abuse. Well, maybe it was from his end, and maybe technically it was, but I didn't feel like it was. And I think that's what makes the difference. People are judging the act, but do you feel that way if you don't talk to somebody who has a judgment about what happened? Now, I tend to feel that this is a very loaded topic, and you may have your buttons pushed already as I'm speaking of this, but consider that there is no past and there is really no future. We create it, so it's always subject to our creation. It's subject to our vibration collectively and individually. Along our energetic timelines where we have lived before in form, if you consider that the ancient days, our life expectancy was very short, especially for women. And so women were courted from the time they were very young to have children because it was a crapshoot whether the children were even going to live. And so men had to do what they had to do to keep their family lines and their bloodlines alive. And the younger the woman, the more they were able to have more children. It was just logical to keep the human race going. And they weren't even aware of that. It was all subconscious, like everything else we do without thinking. So, you know, if we're living the past in the eternal now, which we are, that's why all of your stuff comes back to you no matter what life you're in, to be in the present. And you don't have to go back to past lives in order to retrieve it. These patterns repeat themselves in your life today based upon one thing only: energy. Energy is everything, and everything is energy. And a lot of people will agree with that. But when it comes to subjects like this, where this kind of expression of law of attraction happens, it's considered something that is bad because of the way they judge it rather than seeing it as something on a different level. So I've always been what people call like old school. I am a more European flavored girl. There is a real beauty around your sexuality when you have no one telling you what it's supposed to be like. It's a process of discovery. Now, I just happened to be blessed in the fact that it wasn't traumatic for me and it was actually wonderful. And I still remember it today. And I was 13 years old. That one time when I was 14 with that man, though, people would say was something different. And I was even told that by the first person I ever worked with in counseling. She said, well, whether you know it or not, you know, you've been abused. And I went for that on and off for decades, feeling into the situation. Was I taken advantage of? Sure. I was somebody who was easy to prey on because I was out there by myself without any type of protection. So in his mind, it was something that he was satisfying within himself. With me, it was an experience that I just enjoyed And from someone looking from the outside in, it was something that was wrong. Now, granted, many years later, and this has been like, I was probably 5, 6 years, 6 years, 7 years ago, many years later, Spirit had me go through. I just happened to be in these neighborhoods where all of these things happened in this time period. And because you leave your emotional energy wherever you've been, that's why you are here. Where you've acted something out, that energy's there until it's transformed. When you've had sex somewhere, that energy's there until it's transformed. And where I was so shattered as a youngster, all those wounds were what kind of drew me into that situation. It was a calling. It linked me into a collective, into a consciousness that was part of my higher calling. Now that's going to be hard for you to believe, maybe, and you're entitled to hang on to your stuff. But without that experience, I wouldn't know what I know now in the way of this work and how it works within this work. So if I had been brutalized, that would have been one thing, because it is in the brutalization of a rape that someone fights back more readily. If it is a forceful act, that is why someone who is nice, and it can be part of the deception when it comes to getting what they want, it's more subtle, it's more clever, yet the result is the same. So, well, not quite, because the wounds of brutalization on a physical level have not been triggered in the act, so it's different. But anyway, so there's a lot of, and so I sat with that after I heard her say that for a long time, just kind of not thinking about it because that's not how I process, but having a ball of energy on that experience, tuning into how I felt about it and getting information over time as to how I really felt about it, observing myself there. And so when I went on this trip about 6 years ago and Spirit had brought me through those old neighborhoods, what I did consciously was went back to every one of those places that that I used to hang out or things used to happen. And I took that emotional imprint of that wounded girl at 14 years old out of that situation. I transformed the emotional energy that put her in that situation, and let her know she didn't have to do that anymore. She had no boundaries. I had no boundaries. Siobhan, as a young girl, was never taught boundaries. I stayed under the wire and stayed away from things to preserve myself, and I did a good job. I also had an older sister who would more readily protect me from the predators that she so often entertained. And that was an interesting dynamic. But sex is a beautiful thing when it is done from the depths of your soul, when it is simply an exchange of discovery and innocence. And I feel I was pretty lucky in that. I see so many young men and women are just so messed up into how things are supposed to look and feel. And to be raised when I was in the way I was, in a lot of ways, was really better for me. It seems like my life's really rough. People look at it and they're like, oh my God. And I'm like, yeah, well, when you're not fighting everything all the way, it doesn't stick to you like you think. The wounds are very deep, have been very deep, but I've also worked for more than half my life on transforming the wound, the pain to the vibration of love. And people ask me, well, how are you so grounded on this subject? And I say, well, I've made peace with it. I'm no longer divided on it. So you transform your way out of the duality on the subject by doing your inner work, and you'll begin to see with the eyes of wholeness, which understand without thinking. There's a lot more to every single subject that people want to divide on. There's so many different things at play. It's never just what people perceive it to be. It just isn't. And it is also an individual experience that makes it what it is, and the interpretation of the experience that makes it what it is. It's not what happened, it's how you felt about what happened. I don't care what you say. And this all comes from childhood. There's not one thing in my life, even, that has happened that I haven't been able to reduce to something in my childhood, something in the way of how I felt about what happened. So, how you feel about what happened is what's going on. How you felt about what was said, not what was said, happens. Because everyone can experience the same thing and have 8 different versions of it. So, and we know that, right? Growing up in families. I grew up with 7 siblings. Each one of us had a different experience. We all endured the same type of thing. And it's not limited to just the dysfunction of a family. It's even in cases like this. And sexuality is a big hot topic out here, in the Western world, because um, it just really still is. We have a lot of evolving to do in the Western world, most people. So the principles of lust. When I met the first man I would be with regularly, um, that was quite an experience. It was great. I loved my garden. I loved the house. I loved my cooking. I had been in a motorcycle accident with him shortly after I moved in with him. That was a whole nother experience. It was pretty interesting. Um, it was pretty interesting, but again, it was a teaching moment. It was a time in my life where, I can reflect upon it and learn from it. Um, and also, again, rescue myself energetically from that time. Um, because there's a lot of things I would never share with anyone because it's not necessary to air it. It's not telling your story where the story is healed. It's healing the story and telling it from the other side of it where it's truly beneficial to others. So there were times in that relationship where I reflected for many, many years after as to the dynamic, and again was given the inspiration to go back to these places physically and on another level, and uh, rescue myself, if you will, the energetic imprint of that girl who was left out into the wild, to be preyed upon by her environment. And so um, there's just a lot of levels to that. But that's how it felt. It's like I always had the mentality and the intelligence of people that were quite a bit older than me. I would never, run around with people my own age because they were boring. They hadn't done anything in the world. They had nothing to tell me. I had nothing to learn from them. And so I was always around older people, even with, around my grandmother and her girlfriends and things. We did a lot of grown-up things as a young lady, because that is the way I was taught a lady lives. She cleans her house, she cooks her food, she adores her man, and she takes really good care of him. And my grandmother was the vibration of La Dolce Vita, and she adored her life as a woman. And if you like the life of a woman like that, if you have a man that adores you so much that all you want to do is be there for him and be able to be your creative self and express yourself without being thwarted and suppressed and oppressed and controlled, there is no environment that is better than that. And I have only found that with God. I have always had to sacrifice some part of myself because of the ego of man. And I'm convinced it doesn't have to be that way. So the way we're taught to be women through how we are treated by men at a very young age, has a lot to do with how you grow up, and how you grow up has a lot to do with how you are with men as you get older. So to be able to go back to these places and, remove myself from them and transform the energy of this wounded girl who didn't know any better, who was disconnected from herself at times, within the experience, I can say I had a lot of fun. I had the best of everything all the time. Even in the darkest of times, I always had, great accommodations and really wonderful food and a lot of freedom. So, principles of lust. Well, we all learned so much through that, and we would absolutely encourage all of you to be honest with yourselves about your past, how you came into your sexuality. What was your first experience? Is there any pain there emotionally? Was it not an experience you want to remember? Is it someone you're still holding in contempt? Um, was it from someone in your family? All these things, are important to learn to get in touch with how you felt about what happened and transform those feelings so you can reclaim your light, your sensuality in its healthiest form, and your ability to create from this power. Your sexual energy is creative energy, and if it is so messed up with judgments and pain from the past, you're never going to experience the beauty that lies within it.